most expensive cake ever created was baked by a woman named Debbie Wingham at a whopping $75 million. Gems that were placed on the cake were worth $45 million, which is what really pushed it over the edge as the most expensive cake ever created. Today, I'm going to be talking about the techniques and tricks that are used to make a homemade cake. Although many people say that they just don't have the ability to make a cake, it really is about following the recipe. I decided to bake a cake from scratch to show the drawn-out process that a cake can take, rather than just adding water, eggs, and oil to a prepackaged mix. According to www.thekitchen.com, the difference between baking a scratch versus a box cake are using your own ingredients instead of the ones that are just listed on the back of a box. You know exactly what you're putting into your mouth, and it just makes it an overall better situation. Now, also, it really just depends on the situation and the preference that you have. If you're at home and you're crunched for time, then obviously you would use a box mix just to make things simpler, and it would still taste really good. However, if you do have enough time, I would say going for a scratch cake. Like I said, you already know the ingredients that you're putting into the cake. It makes it more authentic rather than that over sugary taste that you would get of a box mix, and you know that you made it yourself. And also, certain cakes don't have box mixes. You wouldn't be able to go to the store and just find a chocolate coat cake just lying anywhere on the shelf, which is what I'm going to be baking today. According to www.browneyedbaker.com, the recipe starts with a greased 9x13 pan. You have to make sure that you spray it with cooking oil so that your cake doesn't stick to the bottom of the pan. Next, set your oven to 350 degrees so that can preheat while you're adding all your ingredients together. The first thing that you would do would be whisking together 2 cups of flour, 2 cups of sugar, half a teaspoon of salt, half a teaspoon of baking soda, and a teaspoon of cinnamon. You need to make sure that you whisk it together so that it has no bumps and your cake doesn't bake with bubbles in it. The next thing you do after you set that aside is get a small saucepan and you put it on the stove and you turn the heat to medium. I would say that on a scale of 1 to 7, that would probably be about a 4. You add in a cup of butter, which is 2 sticks of unsalted butter, 12 ounces of Coke, and 1/4 cup of cocoa powder. Now you need to make sure that you chop up your butter into smaller chunks so that when you put it in your saucepan, it doesn't take too long to melt, so it melts evenly throughout. Also, I would say make sure you don't turn your heat up too high, thinking that it would make it boil faster and you could get done with it, because that could leave burned Coke on the bottom of the pan or it just wouldn't cook evenly. So make sure you have it on medium. Once it starts boiling, take it off the heat and you mix that mixture into the flour mix, getting all the bubbles out again, so you'd use a whisk. And then you can set that aside. The next thing that you would do would be to whisk together 2 eggs, half a cup of buttermilk, and half a cup of cocoa powder. After you whisk that together, you would add that mix into your overall batter. You need to make sure you blend well, again, so you wouldn't have bubbles in your cake. You put it into the pan, the one that you already greased, to make sure that the cake doesn't stick, and you put that in the oven for about 35 to 40 minutes. About 15 minutes before your cake is done cooking, you need to start making the frosting. Again, you would get a small saucepan, and this time you would turn the heat up to high, and you would add in 12 ounces of Coke, just the 12 ounces of Coke. You would let that boil for about 12 to 15 minutes until the Coke reduces to half a cup. So you would really just let it sitting there for about 12 to 15 minutes. You would add, after that is done reducing, you would add 1 stick of salted butter, again chopping it up into smaller chunks, and 1/4 cup of cocoa powder. You would mix that together until the butter has completely melted, and then you would take that off the heat. The next thing that you would do would be to sift through 4 cups of powdered sugar. You need to make sure you sift through it so that it doesn't have any bumps in the cake or in the frosting as before. So you need to add 1 cup of powdered sugar at a time. It just makes it easier to mix in. Once you do that and you mix all of it together, your cake should be done by now and you can set that on the counter. So then you would just pour your frosting right over the hot cake, so it'll be hot frosting over the hot cake. After that, you just let it sit there until it is about room temperature, and then you can eat it. So your cake is done. So also, another point is just adding the ingredients isn't going to make the cake. You have to make sure you take it out at the right time, you add the frosting correctly, and overall you just pay attention to the directions. So really, although most cakes usually add the frosting after you let the cake cool so the frosting doesn't melt right off, since the frosting was already hot, then in this situation, it's fine to just add it right on. So really, again, that just re-emphasizes the point that you have to be paying attention to what you are doing, or you could completely screw up the cake. Again, box versus scratch is completely based on preference, although I like to bake my cakes from scratch so I know what I'm putting in there, and I can add my own personal touch to it. It really just is based on the amount of time that you have, the space that you're in, and the type of cake that you're baking.